All right, so the headline of this story is that Pramila Jayapal is reintroducing Medicare for All in 2021 in the House as a bill. But I wanted to talk about this story basically because I don't think that it's just about the legislative process and how it's going to be moving forward through Congress or whatever, because we're dealing with Joe Biden as the president, okay? This is a guy who said very straight up, if Medicare for All passed through the House and the Senate, that he would veto it if it made it to his desk. Okay, so, as far as getting Medicare for All, that's not really on the table, and I don't think that anybody thinks that it's on the table right now under a Joe Biden presidency. If we wanted it to be legitimately on the table right now, which it should be, given that, we're in the middle of a pandemic and thousands of people have lost their health insurance because in this country we like to tie it to employment, and as well as people being price gouged out of their asses for medical care that was a necessity that they did not have a choice to give. Basically, our entire healthcare system has been getting absolutely fucked from every single angle, especially during the pandemic, but even before the pandemic, when we had between 40 to 60,000 people dying every single year as a result of a lack of access to healthcare, in addition to around 500,000 Americans going bankrupt every single year due to medical costs. So just an abject failure of a medical system that we have here in the United States. And somehow, we are going to make it through this entire pandemic without it even being seriously on the table. So I just wanted to use this really as an excuse to talk about Medicare for All. But here's the headline, right? So Jayapal Dingle to unveil Medicare for All Act exactly 1 year after the first COVID cases confirmed in every state. So amid a deadly pandemic that has further exposed the absurdity and immorality of tying health insurance to employment, Democratic reps Pramila Jayapal and Debbie Dingell are expected to introduce Medicare for All Act of 2021 this upcoming Wednesday, exactly 1 year after the first coronavirus cases were confirmed in all U.S. states and the District of Columbia. The bill's official introduction, set for March 17th, is an attempt to link the cause of universal health care with the devastation wrought by the pandemic. So yeah, this is basically more of a way to engage in a rhetorical battle, or a way to bring this up as a discussion, or bring it to the forefront of the discussion in political discourse right now, more so than it is let's get Medicare for All through the legislative process right now. And I think that part of it is really just as important, because why the fuck are we not talking about Medicare for All right now? Why are our elected officials, right, in the Democratic Party, we know the polling on this, okay? Upwards of 90% of the Democratic Party supports Medicare for All. A vast majority of Americans support the policy. So why is it that we're not even having this conversation, that the leaders of the Democratic Party, who are supposedly representing their constituents, really, we know who they're representing health insurance donors, okay? The health insurance industry spends more on lobbying in order to keep the status quo how it is than the fucking defense industry. Okay, so just to give you a perspective, with all the money that we spend on weapons and bombing innocent civilians overseas and invading countries illegally, etc., the US empire is ginormous. But even with all that, healthcare is an even bigger industry that we're talking about right here. And so the power that these industries have is unfathomable when we're really trying to think about it. And so they have control over these politicians, especially the establishment politicians, who take campaign donations from some of these private insurance companies, some of the big pharmaceutical companies and stuff that have been profiting off of this pandemic. And so that's how we end up with a situation where healthcare billionaires are doing extraordinarily well throughout the course of the pandemic, at the same time as average Americans are struggling to pay medical bills, are drowning in medical debt, and are dying because they're scared that they can't afford healthcare, or if they go to get healthcare that they will be bankrupt, or that they've been putting off healthcare over time, and so illnesses build up and they have to suffer the consequences as an inevitability of that. This is all a product of what? Why is our healthcare system so fucked up in the United States when it's not as fucked up around the developed world? It's fucked up in the United States because we allow these private companies, whose only purpose, they have one purpose, and this goes for all companies in a capitalist system, but especially in something like healthcare is where you see the immorality of it. They have one goal, and that one goal, that one purpose that they all operate for is profits. That is their only purpose, even when it is to the detriment, the direct detriment to society as a whole, or in many cases with corporations, it's to the detriment of their own workers. But we see this exposed in the healthcare system, especially during a pandemic like they were just talking about in this piece. Because while we're in the middle of a pandemic and we have people who are losing employment because businesses are having to shut down and there's less business activity going on because there's a deadly virus spreading, people are not even being protected for the bare minimum. So you're simultaneously having the consequences, the economic consequences that people are facing, while you're having a public health disaster, a public health crisis. And then on top of that, you have people who don't even have healthcare, or their healthcare is so expensive that they might as well not even have healthcare. So this entire system doesn't make sense, and it's been exposed as how it doesn't make sense, especially throughout the course of the pandemic. And so that's why it has been, or should have been, so important for us to be having this conversation throughout the entire course of the pandemic and to never have dropped it. I don't know when it managed to get dropped, but somehow I feel like because Joe Biden is the president, that a lot of people are taking a back seat and they're saying, oh, well, there's no way that we're going to get the policy under Joe Biden, so therefore we can't talk about it. There should never be a time when we are not talking, not just Medicare for all, this should go for all policies that we support. We should never be relenting, okay? We should constantly be keeping up a maximum pressure campaign against every politician who refuses to adopt our proposals into their agenda. Again, this is a policy that we're talking about here, supported by 90% of the party. So if you're an elected representative, what the fuck is the point of living in an elected representative democracy if they can just openly defy the will of the people? That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about politicians simply doing their job and listening to their fucking constituents. So it's really not that complicated. There's no reason why the conversation shouldn't be surrounding Medicare for all right now, as the inequalities, the destructive nature, the consequences of our healthcare system have been laid bare for everybody to see. There's no reason why that shouldn't be at the forefront of our conversations, let alone not being talked about at all. And by the way, Joe Biden ran on the public option, right? Do you remember in the Democratic primary when everybody was saying, oh, Medicare for all is so, it's too much. You're never going to get the votes for it. You're never going to be able to pass it through Congress. You're never going to be able to get it through the Senate, right? Because everybody's too conservative. You're never going to get these politicians on board. But thankfully, we have Joe Biden, right? This moderate Republican conservative type who's going to reach across the aisle and he's going to work with Republicans and they're going to do something like the public option. What the fuck happened to the public option? I haven't heard Biden talk about the public option in months. I mean, maybe even since he was on the campaign trail. When was the last time you heard Joe Biden seriously talk about the public option as even being on the table? Because I haven't heard it in months. So maybe I missed something, but it seems like during the Democratic primary, the reason why they talked about the public option so much was because they never intended to actually do it. That was them saying, la 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 la, look over here, don't think about Medicare for all, here's the serious proposal, here's the real compromise that DC politicians are going to get behind, right? And then I guess some people fell for it, but it was never the case. They were never going to do the public option. Seriously, they never intended to do that. That's very clear right now. Okay? And so what did they do? Well, in the COVID-19 bill that they just passed, Joe Biden's coronavirus bailout package, did they provide, because Joe Biden does have the power under his authority to expand Medicare as an emergency provision for the entire country throughout the duration of the pandemic. He has the ability to do that. He's chosen not to do that. And so what did they do instead of that? They gave out gigantic handouts with taxpayer dollars to the private health insurance companies through programs like Cobra. So they subsidized the private market during the pandemic instead of getting to the actual underlying issue, which is the private market. There is no reason for the profit motive to be anywhere near a market like healthcare. Okay? This is an inelastic demand. People are always going to need healthcare. And so when you have gigantic companies, pharmaceutical companies, health insurance companies that essentially have near monopolies on these types of things, they can price gouge the shit out of people because people don't have a choice of whether or not they need life-saving healthcare. So they price gouge the shit out of people. And as Kyle Kalinske often describes it, and I think it's accurate, they're like a mafia. Okay? They are the unnecessary middleman between you and your doctor, you and your healthcare, that are shaking you down in the process. So we simultaneously have the most expensive per capita healthcare in the world, while we're getting less results for it, while we have tens of millions of people uninsured and tens of millions more underinsured, and nobody is even fucking talking about the solution. So that's what I wanted to do. That's why I made this video. I wanted to bring it up again because we can't drop this conversation, guys. I know that it sucks that we got Joe Biden in the White House and it seems like we don't have that many paths forward, but we do have some paths forward. And part of that is launching this campaign or continuing the campaign of maximum pressure to force these fucking politicians to explain. If you don't support Medicare for all, explain why. And make them explain it over and over and over again. Because guess what? They don't have good explanations. So at a national scale, which I think Medicare for all is a national problem that we have to approach from that front, because you can do the state by state approach, right? And we've seen that attempted in different places, but that is kind of a divide and conquer approach where we are going to be the ones being divided and conquered by this massive industry that is the healthcare industry. So we do have to really approach it from a national front, but I do support any attempts to get it at the state level. But at the same time, we need to be continuing to have this conversation, okay? Don't drop it. Don't allow these politicians to just jump over that as the default. All right, so we have this bill that's being introduced March 17th. So get ready for it and get ready to apply pressure on your politicians and force them to answer for why they don't support this policy. Let's not let it just fade into the background as a given, as, oh, well, it's unlikely to pass, so let's not even talk about it. No. Now is the time to talk about it more than ever in the middle of a pandemic that has exposed all of the reasons why our for-profit healthcare system is a disaster and why we need to move as quickly as possible towards a Medicare for all single-payer system.